Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?
This whole party.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
I'm down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?
This whole party.
Welcome to Down with D&D. My name's Shawn Merwin, and today my co-host is one of the amazing Kobold Press team, editor Meagan Maricle. Thank you for coming on the show to share your knowledge with us.
Woohoo! Thank you for having me. This is exciting.
I can't wait to talk Kobold Press and editing, and especially talking about the underworld and the Empire of the Ghouls with you.
Ooh, yes.
Now, I believe you've been on the show before, but in case people don't remember who you are, could you tell us who you are and what you do in the D&D world?
I am Meagan Maricle, and I am an editor for Kobold Press, and that's pretty much what I do in the D&D world. Is I make other people's awesome work look cleaner.
You didn't say awesomer.
Oh, I'm sorry. Should I have said
You know why?
awesomer?
Because you're an editor.
Yeah.
Because you know better. Because I would have been all awesomer, but you have it together, Megan. You do.
I mean, I can start saying I make things awesomer if you'd like.
Okay. All right. Then I'll probably get edited at some point.
Yeah,
but,
probably.
It can't hurt to try. So how long have you been with Kobold Press?
Officially, it'll be a year in July. Unofficially, because I freelanced with them for about a year before then. So I guess about 2.5 years or so.
I was going to say, I know it's been more than a year because I've been working with you for more than
Yes,
a year.
yeah. I think it's been almost 3 years total as far as stuff that I've been doing with them. But as far as being a more permanent kobold, it's only been about a year.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk a little bit about Kobold Press and then a little bit about your personal experiences.
Sure.
So could you give us some background on Kobold Press in general? You know, who they are, what they do, whatever you want to, your PR spiel about Kobold Press.
PR spiel, goodness. I'm the editor, Shawn. I mean, I don't have to talk to the people up in the front. Well, I do at the conventions, but
yes. I've seen you at the desk. Yeah, I've seen you at the booths. I know that you can do this.
Yeah. So the brief rundown is Kobold Press. We are a third-party publishing company for Dungeons and Dragons products. At one point, we did do Pathfinder stuff as well. And so we have a lot of Pathfinder and Dungeons and Dragons, or Pathfinder 1, sorry. I probably should have specified that. But right now, a lot of our focus is on 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. We are most famously known right now for our Tome of Beasts and Creature Codex. They're our big monster books. We finished up our Kickstarter for Tome of Beasts 2, so our third big monster book. Finished that up in, I think, February or March this year. And then we have a big spell book that should be releasing sometime later this year, sometime soon-ish. And that, I think, kickstarted back in October, if I remember the dates correctly. So yeah, a lot of the content that we create is meant to be used in any world or any setting, right? Like we like to make it to where our monsters are really cool and you can throw them in your homebrew game, or you can throw them if you want to play in like the realms or something, you can put it wherever. We like to keep ourselves relatively open for that. That being said, we do have our own world, Midgard. And it just because it's called Midgard doesn't mean it's just Norse. A lot of people immediately assume that when they see me at the booth. They're like, so you guys are like a Norse setting? Like, no, we have Norse stuff. But our Midgard setting is very much kind of what's one of our designers said once was, he's like, take the history of the world in like the 1400s and then put like this fantasy haze across it. And that's kind of a very light way of describing Midgard. But yeah, we like to play with real world histories and real world cultures and kind of give a fantasy spin to them.
Yeah, there's sort of a Egyptian part of the world too, right? That's very like the Sahara Desert and that sort of the mythos that goes along with that.
Right. Yeah, we do have our entire Southland section. I mean, part of it's Egypt, but there's a lot of in the Southlands, the people who created it focused a lot on the history of a lot of the different African countries, right? Because there's more to Africa than just Egypt.
Sure.
But Egypt's what a lot of people think of, right? Especially ancient Egypt with the cool gods and their history and everything. But we have an entire continent, the Southlands, and that one we had a Pathfinder book that came out for that one. So there's that's where a lot of the lore for that is. And yeah, so the world is big and expansive. So we put out content for that as well.
And your kobold in chief is Wolfgang Baur, correct?
Yes. Oh, yes. I probably should have mentioned that. Kobold in chief is Wolfgang Baur.
Yep. And so he has a history with D&D, not just with Kobold Press, but with TSR and Wizards of the Coast.
Correct.
Going back a ways.
Quite a ways, yes.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, the first D&D adventure that came out for 5th edition, first hardcover adventure, I should say, was the Hoard of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat, which were done by the folks at Kobold Press.
Correct, yes. From my understanding, that was before I was with Kobold, but from my understanding, the official D&D team was working on finalizing the rules and all of that, so they had Kobold come in and be like, hey, here's the rules, do a cool adventure with it. So they commissioned Kobold to do that adventure. So that is the first adventure that we've done with Wizards of the Coast, and then a lot of our designers, Wolfgang included, worked on Ghosts of Saltmarsh.
Yeah, that's right too. Yep. So there is a connection between Wizards and Kobold Press that goes back a ways, both through Wolfgang and through the work that's been done since 5th edition came out.
Yes, sir.
So when you talk about 5th edition, you can't not mention Kobold Press because of that connection, but plus of all the great stuff that's come out for 5e from Kobold since. But let's leave Kobold behind for a second and let's talk about you.
Oh, yeah.
What brought you into D&D?
So do you like officially, or do you want to go like back all the way to the beginning?
The answer is yes. I want both. I want to know what got you started with D&D, then how you got into the industry from there.
Well, in a roundabout way, Bill Slavicsek, technically.
Okay.
So he put out an adventure, or he was one of the lead writers on an adventure called Council of Worms.
Yes.
I think it released in 93, 94, something like that. And I was a 7-8-year-old sometime around then. And
okay.
I really, really liked dragons. And my mom and my stepdad, they kind of met in college by playing Dungeons and Dragons. So they were both big D&D nerds to begin with. But it was never anything, because it was something that, that was mom's night out, right? Like that's how she met my stepdad, and that's how she met a lot of her friends. And, we were at the babysitter. Mom had her, once a week night out, right? And, but then after they got married and we moved and we were kind of away from their friends, shortly around that same time was when Council of Worms came out, and my stepdad and my mom were like, you know what, we should get the kids involved, because I had a younger brother at the time, or I still have a younger brother, but we were both there, and of course it was a way, because my stepdad wanted to have a way to kind of bond with us and get to know us and things like that. So
sure.
So yeah, we started playing, and it was kind of first we were like, oh well, that's the grown-up thing, right? Like that's the game the grown-ups play. Why would we be interested in that? But then it was like, well, you can play a dragon. And I was like, I'm sold. Yeah, I want to play a dragon. So we played a campaign where we were baby dragons, and we were like little dragon wormlings, and we ran around and caused all kinds of havoc, and it was great. And, but we were good aligned. We were trying to help people, but we were also baby dragons and not very good at helping people. And,
yeah, you might burn a thing or two down.
Right, and we kept... my stepdad played this gold dragon that was... He was the grown-up kid. Right, he was the slightly older wormling, and he got us in a bar fight the first night, and that was fun. Then we got thrown in jail, and we were like, "What? This is awesome!" So then we thought jail was a den, and that's where we wanted to sleep with our horde. But then the sheriff was like, "Well, you have to do bad things to go into jail." So we would help people, but then every night we would get in fights so that we could go back into jail, and that's where we would sleep at night, and it was great. And I don't know what they were teaching us as kids, that jail is where you sleep, but that's how it was. But then so after that I was just kind of sold, right? Like I loved it. And I was even a math nerd too, so for me THAC0 was an exciting thing to calculate. My brother not so much. So my brother really liked looking at the Encyclopedia Magica. I don't know if you remember those, but there were these little soft cover like blue and red books that were just full of like magic items and stuff. And my younger brother was always like, I want this one and I want this one. So then at the time my mom was DMing, so there were a few things that she would throw in, because there were things that he thought were just, and it's the goofy magic items, right? The little ones that you wouldn't think would be a big deal, right?
Right. But cool to have.
Right. And the kind of stuff that kids would like, right? Yep. Like, I can talk to this and it talks back. Like, my brother's favorite spell ever was Magic Mouth.
Oh.
Like, he would put Magic Mouth on everything just to, like, talk to the wall or talk to the rock or whatever. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. And so for me, D&D was always that kind of family bonding thing after that.
Mm-hmm.
And I just have been playing ever since. I went from 2nd edition to 3rd edition with some friends in high school, continued on with those same friends for 3.5 and Pathfinder. And some of those same friends I still play 5th edition with.
Nice. And so what helped you make the jump from just a player to being actually an editor and a person within the field?
Well, I already wanted to go into editing, so I was in college. That's my degree is in creative writing, and that's kind of the field that I wanted to go into. Unfortunately, I was not able to get anywhere in any type of like editing for newspapers and stuff like that, and because that's where I was like, well, I thought I want to be an editor. It needs to be for a magazine or newspaper. That's how you go about this thing.
Sure.
And that was not working out. So I ended up having other jobs, right? And in the meantime, I heard about Wayfinder, which is a free fanzine for Pathfinder.
Yep.
And I started, and since it's all free or whatever, they don't pay anybody. But I reached out to them after I found out they existed. I was like, hey, do you guys need editors? Because most things that are like that are searching for writers, right? They reach out for writers.
Yeah.
Trying to be an editor in this industry is like, who do you even talk to, right?
Right.
So yeah, I reached out to them and I was like, hey, do you guys actually need editors? Do you have on-staff editors? Like, what do you do? And they're like, heck yes, come edit for us. So I did. And with Wayfinder, they used to be quarterly. So I edited a few of their, I was one of several editors with them for that. Now they're yearly. But it was at a PaizoCon after I had done, I had edited, I think, 3 or 4 issues for Wayfinder. Mm-hmm. And at PaizoCon one year, I went and my friend and I sat in on a panel that Wolfgang was running with Dan Dillon. Mm-hmm. And I can't remember what the panel was because I was just so, like, I was a ball of nerves the whole time. Because my friend had told me, it's like, hey, that's Wolfgang Baur. He runs Kobold Press. You should totally give him your business card. Like, you have business cards now. You should totally do that. I'm like, I don't know. I printed it, but all I've done is a few things of Wayfinder. He's like, no, you got to do it. So that was pretty much our entire conversation, that entire panel. So I'm very sorry for, like, I did not pay attention at all to that entire panel.
Well, I'll tell you what, Wolfgang Baur is here right now.
What?
Yes, he is knocking on our podcast door, and Wolfgang is here. Hey, Wolfgang.
Hey, Shawn.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I know. I can't tell time, apparently.
Time is a construct, and especially in this day and age. But
yes,
we were just talking about Megan's first time getting ready to introduce herself to you, and it was at a panel.
Right, I remember.
Yeah. Shawn's making me embarrass myself by telling my story of how I got into D&D.
Her origin story, yeah.
Oh, origin stories are the best, though.
And so as a person who runs a business that is publishing game material, Wolfgang, what do you say when people come up to you, hand you their business card and say, hi, I'm an editor, can I help you? How do you handle that?
Well, I mean, it never hurts to be polite. I've done this a long time, right? Like, I started getting freelancer business cards at the Milwaukee Gen Cons when I was working on Dragon Magazine.
Yeah.
And sometimes I would look at the business card and it would be a name I'd recognize, and I'd look up at them, and I don't know, I was a very junior editor then. Maybe I had a slight deer in the headlights look, because I'm like, I have just met, famous freelancer.
Right.
And other times I would look and I'd say, okay, great, good to meet you. And I would ask them what they've done and what they're looking to do, and try to get some sense of, do I ever want to work with this person?
Yeah.
And in Megan's case, the answer was, this person seems with it and together.
Yeah.
Um, and then the convention carried on after the panel, and I don't think we didn't work together that year after you introduced yourself, right? It was like the following year?
No, it was, I think, 2 or 3 months. You reached out. There was something, you gave me a test thing to edit.
Yes.
And then you gave me
remember
follow-up
that.
stuff that I thought was more test stuff that ended up going into the world book. So I guess it wasn't
Right.
a test
No,
at
that
that
wasn't.
point.
No, at that point it's like, yeah, I need the help.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty standard with freelancers too, right? Hand them the first project as the one of, I don't know, if this goes south, it's okay, we can fix it. And then see. Well, I guess my strategy with editors is usually throw them way into the deep end.
Because that's where they're going to live anyway. So
that's where they're going to live anyway. They're going to be like, the freelancer's already going to be like behind schedule with a partial turnover that didn't follow the style guide. So, get used to it.
Yeah.
Get tough from the go.
Right. There's no crying in editing.
No, absolutely
But there
not.
is crying in writing.
Oh, there is. And sometimes the editors are the ones, saying, not good enough. I'm throwing this back.
Yeah.
I've never made anybody cry. Goodness, Wolfgang.
No, you
Okay,
haven't.
I'm exaggerating, but
That's other editors.
Okay.
But yeah, it's I just lost the point I was going to make, but that's okay. I'm sure it wasn't that important. No. So we've been chatting, Wolfgang, about our backgrounds with D&D and stuff, and we were going to now switch over to talk about Empire of the Ghouls and sort of the underworld in general in D&D.
Ooh, I can talk to that.
Cool. So yeah.
How far back do you want me to go?
What's so intriguing about that, right? Because you and I probably started playing at similar times, right? Late 70s, early 80s.
Yep,
that's right. And the first adventures that I played were all, you would be in town, then you'd go to the dungeon. Then you would be in town, then you would go to the dungeon. And then came like Queen of the Demon Web Pits, right?
Yeah.
And then it was like, wait a second. There's something even darker and deeper than a dungeon. And
I wanted all of that.
Exactly.
Like, I saw it the D module series with like Trampier cover art printed in 2 colors, like purple.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the 70s.
Yeah.
And I think it was Vault of the Drow was on a hobby shop shelf.
Mm-hmm.
And I just bought it immediately thinking, this will be fun. And I read it and realized, oh, this is part 3.
Right.
My players are all going to get wiped out. But somehow I found Descent into the Depths and the Shrine of the Kuatoans and Queen of the Demon Web Pits. Yeah. I mean, what's so great about that is it is deeper than a dungeon. It's the natural world. You got to hike for days. And my favorite part as a game master is, okay, you can go down into the Underdark, but you can't really just bail for the village at every opportunity, right?
Right.
A big part of the appeal for me was you're committed. You're going in, you're hiking through. I think Gygax said, like, you can't teleport around the Underdark. Wasn't that a thing?
It seems to be, I remember that. It was a long time ago. Many brain
Or
cells.
the Underdark error table was heinously difficult, right?
Right.
So you didn't want to teleport around, but yeah, there's all these weird new monsters. Like pretty much everything we think of as standard for the Underdark now is something Gygax invented in that series.
Right.
And I loved it to pieces. So that's where I started. And then people did Night Below and other sorts of deep, dark, Underdark stuff. The Dungeoneer Survival Guide talked about it. But for me, the next big Underdark thing was when I first moved out to Seattle to work at Wizards of the Coast. And I spent that first winter out here alone. And it was dark and gray and miserable and awful. And it took a little adjusting that much darkness. And that's the period when I wrote Kingdom of the Ghouls for Dungeon Magazine number 70.
Right.
Because it was just oppressive. And I think maybe some of that bled into the manuscript. And that's where the sort of Ghoul Society stuff came from.
Yeah. And I mean, I still remember seeing that article, that adventure, and was like, wow, this is exactly what I've always wanted as a DM, and I didn't even know it.
Yeah, I know. It was, and it's not even my idea, right? Like Roger Moore said, Roger Moore, editor of Dragon, for our younger listeners.
Yeah.
He said the Underdark is, Gygax is totally wrong. What a load of horseshit, he said. It should be the undead, vampires and ghouls and, liches should rule the because there's not enough air and there's not enough food. And
right.
he got all like practical about it. And I'm like, well, you're right, Roger. The undead should actually be super efficient at ruling the Underdark.
Right.
I think that's a great idea. Do you mind if I write that up? And he said, oh, I don't have time. I don't know. Not me. It's just an idea. Run with it. I'm like, thank you, Roger. I think I will.
And years later, we are continuing to run with it.
We're still running with it. Yeah. So, I mean, Empire of the Ghouls came back again in 3.5, or rather Kingdom of the Ghouls was formed into a whole empire. And then for 5th edition, just recently, Empire of the Ghouls is now a 350-page book that Megan knows better than I do. A full campaign.
Is it 350?
13,
I don't know, because we don't have the physicals yet. So I'm like, it's hard to imagine that it being that big, but
it's enormous.
Yeah.
It's somewhere around there, plus another 80 pages of Underdark layers, sort of more generic layers, plus the Underdark or Underworld Player's Guide. It's a long way from a 20-page magazine article to hardcover 3 volumes.
So Megan, what was it like to work on that sort of project apart from what you have been doing? Right, you've been working with monsters and you've been doing some adventures and some setting stuff, but this was a huge undertaking, and it's very specific. It's very different, at least in tone. Did it come across as different to you in your role working on the project?
I got really excited about it because the whole, just the concept of an empire of an undead, right? And as far as it feeling different, I mean, I feel like every project I have for Kobold is very different than anything else I've ever seen or done. So I just kind of roll with it at this point. So with Empire of the Ghouls, I was like, all right, this is what we're doing now. But I really liked the concept of it. I thought that was really neat. And then when someone was like, it was originally in, Dragon number 70 or whatever, or Dungeon number 70. And I was like, okay. So I went and looked it up, and I'm like, oh my God, I love Brahms' art. Because he's like, he's my favorite artist. So I was like, all right, I'm sold on this. I mean, I don't even know what we're doing right now, but I'm sold on it. But I mean, as far as the content, it was a little different. But I think it was less of, for me as an editor, I didn't have to focus as much on what was different. I had to focus more on making sure that it stayed the same. So, because our writers are really good at taking weird things and keeping it weird. But the thing that when I was editing that I tried to make sure to encourage the writers to do was the Empire of the Ghouls is an empire, right? Like they call themselves the people, and that's because they are a people, right? Like this isn't just, the players get to go down there and slaughter everything because it's undead and obviously they're evil and they obviously need to die. No, I mean, this is a nation, right? Like you have to have travel papers, you have to have a passport. There are certain rules. If you're a living creature, you are in this quarter, because if you're not in that quarter, you might get eaten, right? Like they have laws and structures, and they have their hierarchy, and it's a little weird, but it's still, we had to maintain that familiarity, right? Like it still had to feel like a real nation. Like this is a country, or quote unquote country, that does trade with other people. Their capital city has embassies for ambassadors, and I think that was the bigger challenge, was making sure that it still felt weird while also feeling very much like this is an actual nation. Sure, it's run by undead, but it's a nation.
Right. And that sort of nationhood and that sort of structure helps players and DMs, I think, make that transition from the known to the unknown. Correct. Right. It's still got the laws, it's still got that, but it can get really weird within the structure that you can cling to, or the players can cling to for a little bit of hope.
Right.
Because otherwise it might just be overwhelming darkness constantly.
Exactly,
and
yeah. Like
chaos.
we didn't want it to be overwhelmingly weird. It had to have something recognizable. But yeah, it is not a safe place for living creatures to be.
I think that's where it gets to be fun, though, right? It's like, well, this is a merchant, and he's traveling from town to town selling his wares in the Underdark. He's a kobold, and his pack animals are giant lizards, but still, we sort of know what that's about, right? And then at some point, what you were saying, Megan, about you've got the right papers, you're living in the right quarter. At some point, you realize we're in a city full of ghouls. There's thousands of them. There's a whole legion that defends the emperor. And we've got a piece of paper keeping them from eating us.
Right.
It starts to feel pretty tenuous, which it should at that point.
Right.
We've gone pretty deep.
Yeah, and that's a tension that you can sort of play with a little bit as the DM too, right? You can take the pressure off a little bit, but then put it on.
Let's go to the market and get some equipment. Oh, look, that guy is selling dried eyeballs and half a leg over there. That's as your vendor snacks. It's not a turkey leg; it's a human foot.
It's a dark, dark place.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's for every campaign, but for people who don't mind the completely alien and horrific side of the undead, there's a lot to chew on, as it were.
So what, as a player, what can you do different here that using the rules that you put forth in your campaign?
Oh man, well, there's a player's guide, and gosh, Shawn, I think there's a little chunk of that that's yours, right?
Just a bit, just a bit.
And I didn't write anything for the player's guide. I wrote mostly the setting stuff for the game master.
Well, you wrote the one of the races.
Oh, and I wrote one race. Oh God, I did write one race, and they were fun. So the Setar are the children of Nidhogg, the dragon that gnaws at the roots of the world tree in Norse mythology. And they're basically an apocalyptic death cult that isn't super efficient about it. Like, some of them want to bring about the end of the world now. And others are like, yeah, what's your hurry? We can always destroy the world tomorrow.
It's the laid back version of the death cult. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, there's some hard chargers in there, too. Yeah. Like, yeah, you lazy bums, get off your butts. Let's destroy the world.
Right.
But there's also there's the Big Lebowski satire, right?
Exactly.
Like, come on, man, have a White Russian, chill out. And they're a hideous race because I wanted to base them off of physically and in appearance, sort of like maggots or small gnawing insects, the sort of things that would devour the roots of the world tree. And the art by William O'Brien, I think, is really kind of nasty. They are somewhere in between. How gross are they, Megan? Like in between Mind Flayer and, I don't know, Umber Hulk, somewhere in that territory.
Yeah, I guess I like he gave him like that kind of eyeless eyeball look, right? Like I like that kind of the kind of milky eyeball. I like that. That's nice and alien. But as far as what players can expect, I think one thing that Empire of the Ghouls does allow players to do better than in other campaigns is play the anti-hero. Right? Like we have a lot of, like in our player's guide, you can play a Darakul, so that's our ghoulish race, right? You can play Darrow, you can play all these things that are naturally from the underworld, and you might not necessarily, you don't have to be a bad guy, you can be a good guy and be these races, but I think it definitely opens up a lot more opportunities to play that anti-hero, right? Like one of our backgrounds is you were a member of the Empire and you deserted it, and then an alternative, like a variant of that background, is you were a slave in the Empire and you escaped it, right? And then maybe you're doing this whole campaign to get back at your former masters or whatever, but or you're trying to get back at the Empire that you left because they were bastards and how dare they, right? I think there's a lot more room to play that anti-hero type in this particular campaign. Like a lot of the campaign is kind of focused on, well, not necessarily focused, but the idea is the players are still trying to save the world, right? We don't want the world to end. Right. But just because you don't want the world to end doesn't necessarily mean you're a good guy. you could be a bad person that just happens to really like the world being where it is and how it is, right?
Right.
So I think there's a little more room for that in this campaign than in I guess some other campaigns maybe, because we have those kind of player options available.
Yeah, and the quote unquote evil campaign is something that at least once long-term players try, and very few succeed at, I think, because they lose that focus of, even if you're an evil character, you still have to have goals, because the goals are what make the campaign. So you're chaotic evil and you just want to go around killing everybody. That's not a campaign.
That's a short term,
right.
That's a one shot.
Yeah, that is one shot. It might be a very short one shot, depending on your DM. But
yes.
But you can still put together a story that allows those alternative goals and alternative methods while still being quote unquote heroic. And that's that's what I love about this setting, is that I do think it allows those stories to be told organically. It's easier to tell a story like that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and with Empire of the Ghouls, I mean, it's not like everyone needs to be a villain or everyone needs to be an anti-hero, because there are a few parts of the story that kind of just at least is hoping that the PCs are good people, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you're right. Like as long as you've got those kind of common goals of, we want to stop this nation from doing whatever, and some people might be like, I have to stop them because it's the right thing to do. And other people might be like, I have to stop them because I don't like them, or I want to take over in their place or something, like there's different ways that people can go about that goal as long as we have that goal. Like you said, that shared goal.
Right.
Yeah, the campaign's about the goals, and Empire of the Ghouls has both short-term and long-term a really nice structure. I mean, you kind of get sucked into it slowly. It's not like chapter 1, welcome to the deep Underdark.
Right.
But by the time you hit those mid-levels, you're kind of ready for it.
So what levels does the adventure include?
We start them off at first.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was that, Megan?
1 to 13.
1 to 13? Oh, that's a campaign. You're not just...
and there's an appendix at level 14, which is not required.
Okay. Nice. So, is there anything coming up in Kobold Press that you would like to talk about, share? Any new projects or anything that you want to push or anything like that?
I mean, I'm always willing to talk about what's coming and what's new. The most exciting stuff we've got cooking at the moment, besides Empire of the Ghouls, is we've got Deep Magic for 5th edition D&D, which is a compilation of new schools and styles of magic. It's about 730 spells, 700 and something like that. New arcane traditions, 20 new domains for clerics, new styles of druids, pretty much something for every spellcasting class.
Wow.
And it's material we've been working on since like 2015.
Right.
So
is that
juicy.
That's what you're working on now? It's not available yet?
It is headed to press.
Wow.
It is not available yet. It kickstarted last year.
Okay.
And it did really well. We threw in a lot of extra stretch goals. We actually took some spells from Kickstarter backers.
Nice.
So there's some wild curveball type spells that went in there. But there's also things that relate to Empire of the Ghouls. There's like blood magic and certain types of necromancy and spells for villain. There's a whole appendix on, I think of as the magic that is for the game master, right? Give it to the DM, don't give it to the players, because it's the Cthulhu mythos magic, the blood magic, the void magic, the stuff that corrupts your soul, right? Like, you could give it to the players. It could be a really interesting story saying, I only wanted to use a little blood magic to save my friends.
Right. Until the blood gods come a-calling.
Yes. Yeah. And then suddenly it seemed like a bad decision. Yeah. But yeah, that hardcover is not going to be out till probably first week of August, I'd say.
Okay. And the Empire of the Ghouls was also a Kickstarter, and that is now available in PDF digital format. Is that correct?
It is. And also it's available for your virtual tabletops. the full campaign is built up on Roll20 platform and the Fantasy Grounds platform.
Nice.
So those are good. And we just got the good news from the press before the holiday here. They're opening up. They're going to finish binding the books. Sometime in June, they will wrap up printing, and we hope to have printed versions by late July.
Okay. Available at the Kobold Press store?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think both might be available for pre-order as well.
Okay.
So if you want to secure your copy or get it in the first wave shipped out,
all right,
by all means.
Don't wait for a convention because we don't know when those will be again.
Yeah, I miss conventions.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Me too. Well, I want to thank you both for coming on and talking about your work with Kobold Press and the Underdark empire of the Ghouls specifically.
Sure. Thanks for having us.
So I am going to say thank you to some of our patrons: Scott Ryder, Sean P. Kelly, Stephen Bissonette, Steve Radabaugh, T. Koustik, Ted Atkinson, Victor Wyatt, and Zach Goins. Thank you so much for supporting the show. Wolfgang, where can people find you and your work on social media?
Well, we do have a Patreon.
Yes.
Called Warlock. So patreon.com/Kobold Press. We do a bunch of stuff there. A bunch of my writing appears in that. But you can also find me online on Twitter as @MonkeyKing, and of course koboldpress.com. And probably Facebook, and I don't know, I'm missing someplace. We have a YouTube channel.
Yeah, Instagram.
Instagram, yeah, you name it. Kobolds are everywhere. They're hard to get rid of once they start to invest.
They are, and they trap everything too. So you got to be careful.
Yeah.
And Megan, where can people find you?
Well, mostly I'm just on Twitter with GM Moonwolf. But yeah, Wolfgang mentioned Facebook. We do have the Kobold Press fan page. It's Kobold Press and Midgard on Facebook. And I do know that Wolfgang and I will answer questions on there. So when people have, lore questions related to the world or questions related to how certain monsters work or something like that.
That's a fun community. Yeah, like the artists come out of the woodwork, the cartographers, the designers of the various events. So that fan group is really lively.
Yeah, I think I get tagged more there than on any place else on Facebook. So that's it is.
We have questions.
Yeah, no, it's a very lively community. It's true.
Yeah, there were even some recent questions about Empire of the Ghouls since it did release in PDF form. So there have been a lot of people asking questions about ways to run it and how to do certain things with the Daracool and all that.
Well, I cannot wait to run my copy of it. I know that. You can find me on Twitter at Shawn Merwin, or you can go to the Misdirected Mark forums at forums.misdirectedmark.com to talk about D&D. Down with D&D is a Misdirected Mark production, the media arm of Encoded Designs. Hey, Megan. I know that you've been editing a lot of monsters. So what are you going to do now?
I'm definitely going to go edit some more monsters and try not to kill too many.
There you go.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?
This whole party.
You down with D&D?
Yeah, you know me.
You down with D&D?
Yeah, you know me.
I'm down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?